Well, Congressman, congratulations on being named chair of the Legislative Branch Subcommittee, which oversees Congress's budget. What does a Legislative Branch Subcommittee chaired by Mark Amodei look like?
Well, I think we have to take a look at the history for the last few budget cycles, see where we've increased spending, where we haven't increased spending, to see, those value judgments. The entire budget for Congress is pretty much discretionary. So there's a lot of work in that sense in terms of doing the right thing for the Capitol Police, regular operations, still lessons learned from January 6th of a couple years ago, Library of Congress, large operation nationwide, big effect on libraries here in Nevada in terms of some of their programs. Architect of the Capitol is basically the buildings on Capitol Hill, which we're opening up again now after 2 years ago on January 6th. The government printing office, Congressional Budget Office, big deal across the whole budget this time, and also the Government Accountability Office, which has a large part in oversight for what's going to be going on for the 118th Congress for the next 2 years. So
You've
lots
got
to do.
a lot of responsibility. For a little bit of perspective, Catherine Tolley McManus of Politico tweeted when she had heard that you may get this position. Remember when Amodei told me he was considering laying off his staff because they had nothing to do in the early months of the pandemic? Implying, what cuts is he willing to make? What extent is he willing to go to in this position?
Well, I think she got that a little bit wrong. My staff was working the whole time in the pandemic. All the district offices were open. People were in those offices. We came to work all day, every day. I think the quote was more along the lines of, if you're not getting value for the money that you're spending for your support, then maybe you ought to think about whether or not you should spend it or not. So it wasn't I was thinking about lending my or laying my staff off, but she got it close. That's probably a good effort on her part.
All right. Well, where do you stand on raising the debt ceiling?
Well, I'll have it comes to us. First of all, we were going to turn into a pumpkin 48 hours from now, and now maybe it's this summer and whatever. I know it's approaching. There's no doubt about that. But with much of the challenge to try to do a good job in DC these days, you have to focus on what the real facts are instead of what the commentators are telling you about. The most recent example was all the fun and games surrounding the election of the speaker, and supposedly, chairmanships were being promised and all that. So separating the wheat from the chaff is the first step in that. And then once you know you're dealing with those actual facts, Amber, then it's like, okay, so let's see what we can do here in terms of the right thing, because as we know, the cost of the national debt, because interest rates have gone up a heck of a lot, is a big deal now, as opposed to just a few years ago when everybody liked interest rates.
Would you vote to raise the debt ceiling if no cuts were made?
Well, you know what? Here's the problem. I think it's time for an honest look that 75% of every federal dollar spent is what is called mandatory spending. Now, that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt are the big ones. But when you say no cuts were made, it's like, well, we shouldn't be looking at cuts that pull the rug out from under people who are already in those programs or close to eligibility. But in a prospective sense, Amber, it's time to look at that. And also, when you take a look at the last 2 years, 4 years in general, there were many items of spending that were put into mandatory spending, which means Congress has no discretion. And so the answer to your question is this: I will vote for what I think is responsible in terms of keeping the federal government from crashing financially and continuing to stack up debt. I mean, we have to have. You can see one of the things that in the budget resolution that Republicans are looking at as a balanced federal budget within 10 years. So, I mean, all that's in the mix. So the question lends itself to, are you for daylight saving time or not? Yes or no? Which is a few less moving parts. So we'll see. We'll certainly take a look at it. We're not going to do anything that's going to crash the country, but by the same token, We need to start moving in a direction that I believe is more fiscally responsible.
Where do you stand on cuts to Social Security, Medicaid, and/or Medicare?
Well, I think you start with, as I just said, you can't pull the rug out from under people that are already receiving those benefits. And for people who are responsibly planning their retirement, you can't say, hey, even though you're 3 years away, guess what? Everything's different. So I think that's part of the legislative process where you evaluate, are we going to change eligibility? Are we going to change benefits to some extent? And when, that's a very key word, when would those take effect? And so a public discussion on the record with full transparency would be a healthy thing to that process, and see what we learn as a result of that. Nobody's even considered it because it's like, oh my God, it's political suicide. The campaign people will murder you and all that other sort of stuff. It's like, well, guess what? There's a lot of folks that are going to get murdered if we keep heading down this thing and just going, the deficit doesn't matter. I'll tell you this, I am a person who does not think that the deficit doesn't matter.
So let's say you are a few years away from retirement and collecting Social Security. You may not have to worry if Mark Amodei has his say. But if you're, let's say,
Well,
40
I think
years old, 40 years old and decades away from retirement, you may have to start making different plans.
that's a fair categorization. I think generally that's accurate.
Okay. You did bring up Kevin McCarthy, and I'm wondering, with the House majority that you have with Republicans, slim majority, what would you tell Americans about how well you think House Republicans will be able to work together after the discord that we saw in electing him to House Speaker?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I think that process, and you may give me a funny look, but I think that process served to unite Republicans more than they were before the process, in terms of talking about those issues in the process that were more important in terms of transparency, amendments, all that sort of stuff. So I think actually it feels stronger than it did after the first vote, after 15. The other thing you have to look at, Amber, is what are those big principles that Republicans had said they would concentrate on? The border, energy, the economy, education, oversight, all those things. And I don't think there's much. I don't think there's much discord amongst the troops, if you will, as far as those issues go. I expect Republicans to stay united on that. There will be some issues that come up from time to time, which because Republicans love intramurals, there will be some issues that come up from time to time which will test that. But I think for the most part, it's been a healthy process. We've come out the other end stronger, and I look forward to getting along with the agenda. The first week on the floor in terms of the IRS agents and anti-violence against right to life locations and stuff like that were not hard votes, I think, for any Republicans. As a matter of fact, you had some Democrats join in some of those, so we'll see.
You did bring up the anti-abortion measures that were passed by House Republicans. Unlikely, though, to pass the Senate. And I'm wondering, why vote for those in the first place if you know they're likely not going to succeed?
Well, the abortion measures that I was talking about was violence against locations and people on either side of the issue. It's like violence against people because of their political beliefs, I think, is a fairly bad thing in most people's commonsensical minds. So I'm not aware of any federal anti-abortion stuff that's in the works right now, although people have talked about it. But it's interesting, Amber, the Dodd court decision, which spawned a whole bunch of, oh my God, said at its simplest level, abortion rights are a state issue. And I agree with that. And as a matter of fact, Nevadans, over 30 years ago, by going to the polls through the initiative process, said, here's what we want the rules to be. And the other thing that a lot of people skip over about that was they also said, if you want to change those rules, you have to go back to the voters. Okay. So while there's a lot of political dust in the air about are you this, are you that, are you whatever, it's like I think the Dodd Court got it right. It's up to the states. So if you're in a state where the voters decide we want it to be more restrictive, or you're in one that says less restrictive, it ought to be up to those states. And so I think that works well. I am not. I am not excited about because I voted against the abortion on demand bill that was submitted by the Democrats late in the last session. Say basically you can have one anytime you want for no reason at all. But part of the reasoning with that is Nevadans are perfectly capable of setting their own rules. So I'm very hesitant to say, oh, we ought to have a federal rule where one size fits all.
Let me clarify on those measures I was talking about. So one condemns attacks on anti-abortion organizations. I think
Correct.
people are concerned that that doesn't condemn attacks on organizations that support abortions. The other piece,
Well,
you respond to that, please.
let me just say this: if there's one that says it condemns attacks on people that support it, you were talking about physical violence. I would vote for that too.
Okay. The other measure was punishing doctors who do not attempt to save an infant born alive during or after an attempted abortion. And so some of these bills, even someone in your own party, according to NBC News, Republican Representative Nancy Mace said, quote, "It's tone deaf at this point. It's never going to pass the Senate. It's never going to get to the president's desk to be signed into law. We're only paying lip service to the pro-life movement," end quote. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think lip service is a little bit strong, but other than that, I would agree with Congresswoman Mace's analysis. But unfortunately, when the bill hits the floor, Amber, I don't have a vote that says, "Oh, the Senate will never pass it, so I'm not voting yes or no." It's like, are you voting present? Are you voting for? Or are you voting against? And so I think her analysis is spot on. Good luck in the Senate. But that notwithstanding, I think it's like, well, the bill's in front of me, so I got three choices. You know the choice I did.
With the makeup of the House and the slight majority that Democrats have in the Senate, of your priorities this session, what do you think is most likely to become law?
Well, let me answer you this way. Nevada is a state that is phenomenally unique in the union in that it is owned like 80 to 85% by the federal government. That's not in and of itself a bad thing, but where you're sitting in Las Vegas, that town is completely surrounded by federal land. Henderson is, Tonopah is, Winnemucca is, Reno is, everybody. And so when you talk about economic development in Nevada, whether it's Southern Nevada, whether it's Western Nevada, or whether it's rural Nevada, you have to go treat with the federal government regarding the real estate in order to do that. And so the biggest example is the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, which is 22, 23 years old now, something like that. Very few people realize that that authorized the disposal in and around Las Vegas of 70,000 acres. And do you know how much has actually been disposed of after 2+ decades? About half. And the reason I tell you that is the cliches of, oh my God, irresponsible growth, but by the Clark County Commission, the Las Vegas City Council, the Henderson City Council is like, well, when you look at over 22 years, 35,000 acres, that's not exactly yeehaw, warm the bulldozers up and start knocking down desert tortoise habitat. So I say, when you say priorities, it's like Clark County and the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act are both due for an update. That was discussed a lot last time in the Senate in the last session, but it never got marked up. So guess what? That needs to be a priority in my mind for the 118th Congress, as well as some stuff in the North. But it's just one of those things where regular business in Nevada requires that you deal with federal lands issues on an ongoing basis so that your communities can continue to grow and thrive. And this is the key part, Amber, in the way that your local county commission, city councils, those sorts of things decide. It's not the federal government telling you you should grow here and not there. It's what do you folks need in terms of what your locally elected folks want for purposes of as you continue to matriculate and evolve.
That's a great example of bipartisanship, because that bill you're talking about, the Clark County Lands Bill, was the work of Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. Here's another example, but maybe not so much bipartisanship, and you can help me understand why not. The topic of immigration. We recently had her on, and she talked about both of these things can be accomplished. You can enact protections for dreamers, and you can also bolster border security. And that sounds similar to what I've read you talk about when talking about fixing the immigration system. But what is the difference here? Why isn't there comprehensive immigration reform happening then?
Well, actually, it's because both sides are addicted to their political talking points, and there are exceptions. Uh, but for the most part, both sides have been afraid to stick their neck out and go, "Hey, enough is enough." The last time we did immigration was when Ronald Reagan was the president 30 some odd years ago. And so you're sitting there going, a few things have changed in over 3 decades that we should react to. There are answers to immigration which don't let anybody malign, don't mean that you can have gang members and felons and all that other sort of stuff being given green cards or whatever. The problem is one side screams uh, amnesty every time you do it, and the other side says the Republicans hate your guts. And as a practical matter, what we're lacking here from both sides is the political courage and the leadership to go, we got to do something about this. Because when you do nothing, you have what we have at the border right now. That creates a vacuum. Amber, it's interesting. I'm not an expert on the U.S. Constitution, but there is a line in there that says the Congress will establish a system of immigration, a system of naturalization. It means immigration. And so it's like, all due respect to both sides, it's time to basically man up, woman up, whatever up. And here it is. Dreamers are not a hard thing to do. If you're a gang member and a convicted felon and a whatever, then guess what? You can't play. But for those folks who have served in the armed forces, have been productive members of this nation and their communities for the time that they've been here, it's like there ought to be a way for those folks, if they want to, especially those that signed up for the program, to say, okay, here's the deal. And at the end of it, you get a green card. And once you have your green card, if you decide you want to be a citizen, then you have the ability to apply. And if you don't, that's fine too. But when you take a look at that on balance, the only thing standing in the way of immigration reform is lack of political courage on both sides.
Do you think you differ from Catherine Cortez Masto and her stance on immigration then?
Probably not a lot in terms of the nuts and bolts. It's like, I signed a discharge petition a couple of Congresses ago to get the Dreamers bill to the floor. And it was a responsible proposal. But, you get the commentator culture and the culture of cliche, and it's like, you've read the stuff, but it's like, it's not helping us. And it is Congress's job to establish a system of naturalization, which is immigration. And we've been asleep at the switch for over 3 decades.
Last question for you from the 117th U.S. Congress. What are you most proud of having accomplished?
You know what? When I look at the job, it's like I'm the only one of the 435 who is responsible for not only my part of Nevada, but in our state, we don't pay a lot of attention to county lines and stuff like that. To have brung a Nevada-centric focus to just about everything we do. There are national issues, but frankly, when it comes to doing the right thing for Nevadans, regardless of where they live, that's something that I think is worthy. And I've been criticized at times for it's like, well, I don't see you on the national news or this or that or the other sort of thing. And I've just got this, and so far it's been successful. I've got this belief that it's like, you do a good job for the issues in Nevada, and the other stuff will take care of itself. So I am I am probably proudest of, I think I'm the same guy that I was 11 years ago when I showed up going, oh, what have I done? Um, as I was then. But also, I think it helps when you're familiar with, what the issue is, whether it's off of West Sahara Boulevard or whether it's off of Winnemucca Boulevard. And I think that voice helps everybody in the state, which is why we've enjoyed the success we have, I think.
Congressman Mark Amodei, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.